Today on Life, Death, and Beyond, we welcome Kelvin Chin, author, meditation teacher, and life after life expert. Kelvin's profound journey began at age 21 when he had a near-death experience after nearly drowning. In his mid-20s, his past life memories began to open, and by his 30s, spontaneous communications on the other side began to unfold. He is the executive director and founder of the Turning Within and Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundations, dedicated to helping people overcome fear and connect more deeply with life and consciousness. For 50 years, Kelvin has taught meditation to thousands of people in more than 70 countries, including the US, Army, and West Point, and has been featured in Business Insider, Newsweek, and Kaiser Health News. Kelvin is also the author of 3 deeply insightful books, Overcoming the Fear of Death Through Each of the 4 Main Belief Systems, Marcus Aurelius Updated 21st Century Meditation on Living Life and After the Afterlife, Memories of My Past Lives, where he shares vivid past life recollections spanning 6,000 years and what they reveal about the continuation of consciousness. A former lawyer and graduate of Dartmouth, Yale, Boston College Law, Kelvin has lived in 7 countries and brings a unique blend of wisdom from both East and West. You can learn more about his work at kelvinchin.org and turningwithin.org. And you can visit his book site at kelvinhenrychin.com. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. That would be at Kelvin Chin Turning Within. And he also has Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Welcome, Kelvin. So glad you could join us today. There's many directions we could go with this conversation. You have an extensive background. So let's start with a little bit about what life was like before your near-death experience, what led up to it, and then your near-death experience, and then the different roles that you played. That way viewers have an idea of your background, and then we'll follow up with just some questions about life, death, and beyond.
Yeah, hey, Laura. Good to meet you here. Yeah, so a little bit about my background. I just kind of give you the 100,000-foot overview, and then we can, of course, revisit any pieces and parts of this. But if you want to start about how, if you want me to start about how I first opened up, I was told that I was first opened up when I was about a year or two old. And I was told by my aunts, my mother's sisters, that when I would visit my grandfather, obviously their father, and they were still living at home. Some of them were still in high school at the time. My aunts. My mom was the eldest, and so I would be playing with my invisible friends, evidently talking with them, and all of this. And I did not remember this until I was in high school. They told me these stories about me. And but the interesting thing is, and this is a little lesson, we'll start out with a lesson right away. I'm a teacher, right? For parents out there whose children might do this, is to not talk down to them. My aunts talked down to me, and I didn't remember it until they told me when I was a teenager, because my first reaction was frustration and anger at my aunts when they told me this. And I realized after a while, I processed this mentally myself, and I realized that they had kind of talked down to me about it or made fun of me, or he's imagining, like made fun of me sort of, because they didn't see what I saw. And so I pushed it away. So that's just a lesson for parents out there or grandparents, to be open and embrace whatever the kid's saying, the child. Anyway, so then when I was a teenager, I was very stressed, and it gradually crept up on me, and I did not know what therapy was. I didn't know what counseling was, and my parents were kind of clueless about it too. But I found meditation when I was a teenager, and I learned to meditate. And we can come back and revisit this, but that was a watershed moment in my lifetime, this lifetime. And so I was a teenager. I learned to meditate. I was in college then later, and I learned to teach meditation soon after that. So I've been teaching
Mhm.
meditation since I was basically my late teens. Um, and About 7 years later, I spontaneously opened up and started remembering things that were confusing to me. It took me a while to figure out that they were past life memories. Again, we can come back and revisit that. I did not believe in past lives. I didn't believe in reincarnation. And yet something was happening and opening up for me. And then about 10 years later, again, spontaneously, I wasn't looking for it. I started opening up to the other side and getting communications from the other side. So that's kind of big picture. And this was, happening many, many decades ago now. And so it's very normal for me. All of this is very normal for me now. I've been meditating a long time. I've been teaching, taught thousands of people around the world in a very easy, effortless way how to meditate. So we'll talk about that. But I also had a near-death experience after I learned to meditate a couple of years, and then several years before I started remembering my past lives. So in my
Mhm.
early 20s, I I had an almost drowning experience in off of San Diego. So that's kind of overview. And as you know, we connected through my nonprofit, and I help people worldwide now. I have clients in 70 countries, and I help them deal with all kinds of anxieties, fears, depression of any sort. I help people deal with overcoming the fear of death. I've written a book about that.
Mhm.
I'm sure we'll get into that. And then I help people connect with the other side, and help them connect with loved ones and so forth. I'm not a medium per se. I've obviously had what people would refer to as psychic experiences, but that's not what I do. I help teach people, I empower people how to connect more directly themselves with the other side. Yeah.
Mhm.
So there you go. That's kind of the over.
Perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, meditation is really important. And I've been meditating since my near-death experience. It was it was like when I came back from near-death experience, one of my teachers that came in because the path kind of unfolded for me. And 2 weeks after, somebody came, and I got the intuition to just go on Facebook and start a Facebook account. And the first person that came up to me was a person who taught meditation, a coach. So they were like a life coach. And I was like, okay, so I'll try it because we got talking to my situation. Um, yeah, and then that kind of just opened my path for me, yoga, and then all this other stuff just followed in many teachers after that. So meditation is really a great journey to be on. So pretty cool.
That's
Can you share a little bit about your near-death experience?
Sure. So what happened? So as I briefly mentioned, I'd already been meditating before I had the near-death experience, and literally, in retrospect, the meditation saved my life.
Hmm.
You'll hear why in a second. So I've been meditating for about 2 years before I had the near-death experience. I the near-death experience happened in summer, and I was going to summer school at the University of California in San Diego. And I went to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, but they had a they had an easy exchange program with UCSD in particular for some reason. And so all the credits were just easily transferred and everything. You didn't even have to apply for the summer program. You just say, I want to go. So you just registered for the class. So it was an intensive program in Mandarin Chinese. So you probably figure out from my last name that I have a Chinese background, but I didn't speak Chinese. My parents grew up in my parents had us grow up in a generation where they wanted us to fit in. So they didn't want us to speak English with an accent. So they explicitly did not teach us to speak Chinese. So I thought, I'm going to go learn on my own. So I took some classes at Dartmouth, and I took a whole year's worth at UCSD. It was an intensive summer program. So I went there, and at registration, I met this girl who was also from the East Coast. Um, and I said, hey, class doesn't start for a couple of days. Let's go. You want to go to the beach? So if you know the layout of UCSD, it's in La Jolla part of San Diego, and you literally walk across campus down a like a an access road to the beach. And so we went down to the beach there at the base of Torrey Pines State Park, Black's Beach there for those people who know the layout of the beaches there. And there were nobody there. It was a hot June summer day. There's nobody on the beach except the two of us, and there's never any lifeguards there. They don't have lifeguards there. Um, and we went in to the ocean, the water, and I was up about waist deep or something, and maybe she was about 15 feet away from me or something, wading into the water. And I just dunked. I lift my feet up and I dunked underwater just to cool off. And
Mm.
the next thing I knew, I see her getting smaller and smaller. And then the cliff. So if you know, Torrey Pines State Park is up, there's a cliff there, 300-foot high cliff. Um, and so I see this 300-foot high cliff going like this, getting small, really fast, getting smaller and smaller. So she's like tiny now, and I'm seeing that this cliff going like that. I'm getting pulled out in what I later found out was a rip current. So a rip current is like a river in the ocean, and they're all over the world, throughout the oceans. There are these little streams and rivers, maybe not little sometimes, but rivers within the ocean, and you can see the currents moving and so forth. And it's like its own river within the ocean. And so I was in a moving body of water within the ocean, and I was getting pulled out in it. Um, and I got pulled out about almost 2 miles. That's what somebody later told me, because I could tell about how big the cliffs were. About 300-foot high cliffs were about 3 or 4 inches tall in my vision. So he figured it out and told me, yeah, you were out 1.7 miles. Um, and so I panicked. And so, just a little tip for those people who are listening: this ever happens to you, you do not do what I did, which is you try to swim back in. You swim at an angle to the beach because you're going to increase the likelihood you're going to get out of the current that just pulled you out. But I panicked. I didn't remember any of that from Boy Scouts. I forgot it completely, and I just went straight back in. And of course, what's happening? Nothing. I'm going nowhere, and I might have even been getting pulled out even farther. Right. So I'm panicking further. I'm really exhausted. I'm getting nowhere. I thought that was it. That's it. I'm going to die now. And I started going down in the ocean because I was exhausted and I couldn't even tread water anymore. And I saw the surface of the ocean going like this, like getting farther away from me. But because I'd been meditating for 2 years before that, the experience of my mind and my body being separate from each other was not unfamiliar to me. So my mind, what happens? So I see the surface of the water going like this, farther away from me, and it's about 3, 4, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet away from me, and my mind as if popped out of my body. So
Mm.
you know what that is if you've had a near-death experience. People will describe it in different ways, but that was how it felt like to me. And but I knew what it was. It was so familiar to me from meditation that I knew that, oh, that's happening. No, I willed, I say I willed, but I just had a desire for my mind to be back in my body, and I struggled to the surface because I knew what was happening. I knew that if my mind left my body, then I could keep leaving my body if I chose to, because I knew this from my meditation experience for 2 years before, right? It was familiar to me. So I had a desire to go back in my body. I pushed myself back into my mind back into my body. I struggled the 4 or 5 feet to the surface, which was really hard to do because I was so exhausted. And I just thought, I had the thought something like, don't panic, something like that. This happened so many decades ago. I don't remember it exactly, but it was like, don't panic. I just caught my breath. I did not try to swim back in like I kept trying to do beforehand. And I just laid there on my back or treaded water or something for a few minutes just to catch my breath. And I said, and I thought that just to take my time, not to try to swim in so fast like I was before, just to take my time. And I did multiple strokes, breaststroke, side stroke, anything to keep my head above water,
Mm.
you know. So because I was worried that if I even did the freestyle or anything, that I would put my head underwater and I'd take in the water and that would be it, you know. So I struggled back to the shore and I must have gotten out of the current. When I went down, I must have gotten pulled out of the current for some reason when I stopped trying to swim because I was making headway towards the cliffs and the beach. And my friend waited for me on the beach, and she said it took me about an hour to swim back in. I climbed out of the water. I literally crawled out of the water enough, and I fell asleep for probably a half an hour. She said I just passed out. So that was kind of not the usual near-death experience that a lot of people have, where they feel like, oh, they're in heaven or they're in the afterlife or whatever. I recognized what was going on. That's why I say the meditations for 2 years beforehand had saved my life, because I knew what it was. If I had had what I call a classic near-death experience, which you hear people talk about on YouTube, and I'm not
Right.
sure about your near-death experience, Laura, but where people are like in this peaceful place and it's all this love and light and everything, I would have been 60 feet down on the bottom of the ocean, and there's no way I would have been able to swim to the surface, you know? I would have
Yeah.
been, yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, so that's interesting because like I know when I meditate, it's almost like you are separating. So I can understand how that is for you. It's almost like you're separating your spirit consciousness from your body consciousness.
Right, right, right. Yeah. So it was not unfamiliar to me. It was very familiar to me. As soon as that happened, I knew what was going on. And I thought, uh-oh. And I desired to go back into my body, and I struggled to get back up. I knew that if I had continued allowing my mind to just be in this peaceful place, that my body was gonna it was going to be the end of my body. So I didn't even think that through. I just knew it at the moment.
Hmm.
A
Yeah,
knowing, I guess. Yeah,
perfect. Would you just say that is like your higher consciousness coming in, helping guide that, or is
I
it
think
just
so.
you?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good way of putting it. I think it was like my larger sense of self. Sometimes I describe it as,
Right.
because because I because I'd been meditating every day, twice a day for 2 years. Um, I think the connection, we'll say, between my conscious thinking mind, which is what most people think their mind is, and that is part of our mind, of course, but it's not all of our mind, as you know, because you've been meditating. There's this huge part of our mind that most people are completely unaware of. But if you've been meditating for a while, you're connecting with that. I knew that aspect of me knew what was going on, and it was like none of the thing back in your body. Yeah,
That's awesome that you're able to put yourself back in. That's cool.
yeah.
Awesome.
It was a choice. It was a choice, but this is also another learning point, which for me, which was how subtle choice can be. The desire was a choice. Now, most people think choosing is like, oh, I make this conscious decision to go to the store. And that is a conscious decision, and that is choice. But choice can be very, 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 very subtle too. Yeah. Just the
Yeah.
desire in that case. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, my near death experience was like the typical you're out of the body, you're on the other side and you're having these interactions and then you come back in the body and you have the light, the love, the colors, the telepathy, the light beings. So yeah, there's a lot of different types of near death experiences. And that's the beauty of it because they're all different and it's helping us on our own journey. I think that not everybody's path is the same. So
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, you're saying exactly what I teach in my classes. Everybody's journey is different, and you can't tell, including with near-death experiences, is a huge range. Yeah.
hmm, yeah. And I've kind of looked at your website and looked into a lot of what you're doing. You do have an extensive background. You were in the service, was that correct?
I taught in the military. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't in military service, but I was an outside consultant, and I was asked to come in and teach meditation in the U.S. Army. At first, I taught the first meditation courses in the history of West Point Military Academy in New York. All the cadets, 200 or 300 people, we ended up teaching the cadets, and the professors, who are all, officers or captains, majors, lieutenant colonels, are the officers. And the commandant learned, his secretary, his assistant learned, I taught the librarian, everybody. And then, because I had already done that, I was asked to teach in Korea on all the U.S. Army bases, and then later on all the U.S. Air Force bases. So I taught up on the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea too. I taught on the U.S. Army base right there, on the demilitarized zone as well. So no, I wasn't in the military, but I worked in the military, teaching meditation. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I think that's very helpful, especially, because they go through a lot, being in the military, the things that they have to do. And I feel like a lot of times, they have to do things that, not normally somebody would want to do, and that kind of goes into like war and things like that. So I think
Yeah,
it's
no,
really
it's a very
helpful.
stressful environment. I would
Mhm.
say that the DMZ, when I was in the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, that was the most stressful environment I've ever been on planet Earth. The most stressful. Never knowing when and if something was going to happen from the north, right? Uh,
Mhm.
and there was a lot of drug and alcohol abuse going on in the army, at the time, and that's why they brought me in, drug and alcohol rehab. But I ended up teaching anybody who was interested, of course. But that was the initial reason why they brought me in. So the stress levels were very, very, very high. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure that was very helpful for them, and hopefully they're continuing to do that, for everybody. So,
Yeah, actually, funny story, I ran into one of my students decades later at a racquetball, at an amateur racquetball tournament that he was competing in, and he ended up winning the racquetball uh, tournament. And he was wearing a West Point T-shirt. And I said, "So did you uh, did you go to West Point?" And he said, "Oh, did you go to West Point?" And I said, "No, but I taught there." And he goes, "Mr. Chin, you taught me to meditate. You taught me to meditate." It's like it was decades later. Yeah, it's interesting.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice when we catch up with people that we've helped before. Um, yeah, and West Point, like I'm from upstate New York originally, and so we visited West Point for a couple occasions when I was younger. I just don't really remember why, but I remember being there for
Hmm.
whatever reason. And I don't know if it was like we had friends or relatives there or whatever the occasion was about, but yeah, so I know that area. Um, so I also seen that you were doing like overcoming the fear of the death foundation. Can you share what part of that mission, a little bit about that and how that helps people?
Sure. Well, so the reason got started getting into the whole death and dying field, if you want to call it that, is because my mom died when I was young. She was young. She was only 50 years old when she died, and she was the picture of health. And then all of a sudden, she wasn't, and she had cancer. I mean, so advanced cancer that the doctors told my dad that she had thousands of tumors in her body, thousands, not just one or two or a few or whatever, thousands. And so she was gone very quickly, and I was very close to my mom. Um, and In fact, there's stories in this book. This is my third book. This is about my past lives. There's stories in there about memories of my past life with my mother, um, which I had more recently. She died many decades ago. Um, but that's how I got into death and dying, helping people with death and dying. And I started a foundation, as you said, about 8 or 10 years ago, and to help people overcome their fears about death and so forth. Because I started to realize, as I was talking to people over the many decades about death and dying, that a lot of people have fears about it and so forth. And so I wrote a book, and this is my first book, Overcoming the Fear of Death. And I talk about four main belief systems that people kind of fall into that are not religious and not cultural beliefs about death and dying, um, but that really kind of underlie the many religious and cultural beliefs about death and dying. Because I wanted to talk about overcoming the fear of death from a more humanistic approach. In other words, it's a broader approach that applies to all of humanity as opposed to just this culture or that culture or this just this religion or whatever. Um, so I looked at four underlying beliefs. So the first one is the science belief, uh, no afterlife. That's that belief. And my father had that belief. Okay. Um, Second belief I called the fear of continued existence. So the concern that they do believe in an afterlife, but they're afraid of what might happen. And the fear can be all kinds of different things. And then the third belief system is belief in an afterlife, but no fear, and may even actually be looking forward to, the afterlife. And then the fourth belief is reincarnation, belief in past lives and that you can come back in a future lifetime in a different body and so forth. Those are the four, what I call major belief systems in the world, and that everybody falls somewhere in there. Some people are hybrids. They may be a little bit of this and a little bit of that one, not sure. But that's the lens I look through. I figure out when I'm helping people who have fears about death and dying, where are they in that spectrum? And then I help them look through their belief. So I do not take the approach like many people. There's basically two approaches out there to help people with death and dying that you see most commonly. One is the religious approach, which is you got to have my belief, and then I can help you get rid of your fears if you believe the way I believe. And then the other approach is a more therapy approach, I call it, thinking about how can you counsel somebody and help them um, just be more comfortable with it, et cetera, et cetera. I take a slightly different approach. My approach is more thinking rationally and thinking more clearly and consistently is the key word about that person's belief. So I always ask the person who comes to me first, what's your belief? And I look through their lens and I help them see where they may be lacking some clarity, or they may be saying this and they may be believing this and they don't go together. And I'll point these things out to them. So that's one of my approaches to helping people with overcoming the fear of death. And the other is I additionally uh, will suggest that they learn the meditation the way I teach it, or some form of meditation. And of course, I teach it, so I talk to them about how what I teach is very, very easy and there's no controlling. And it's, if they've ever had any problems meditating, learning to meditate or meditating before, then with this technique, the way I teach it, it's very easy.
Mm-hmm.
Then,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, with me being on the doula path, I've had a lot of previous experience. I went into counseling, nutrition education, my own near-death experience, kind of had the journey, came back, and I've been like spirit-led since 2010, with a lot of different things. And then also the meditation. So 2024, I was told to start talking and sharing my experience. And then 2025, it's like, okay, take everything that you know and bring it into Life Death Doula and help people with coaching, life review, working through whatever case that you might need to work with them on that as they're transitioning, helping them with fear. So I love that you're doing the overcoming the fear of the death foundation. So that kind of is one thing that stuck out to me on
Mm-hmm.
that, and to have that conversation. Because although I have my own experience with it and what has been, my eye opening to that, like I don't want to impose that on other people. It's helping them see through their lens, and kind of like what you're saying, demystify, where it doesn't align, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. Demystify is a great word. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I help people. wherever they are in the spectrum, in the belief spectrum about death and dying. It doesn't matter to me where they're at. I help them move past the fear. That's the objective, is to moving past the fear, not changing their belief system. Their belief system might shift and change, but that's on their own, of
Mhm.
course. It's not because I'm pushing it this way or that way. Um, but yeah, it's really rewarding because people come to me with all degrees of fears, whether they're about fears about death or fears about other things, and just to see them move past that and start living their life. To me, it's all about living in the present, our continual present, and how can we live in a more contented, inwardly peaceful way. That's my objective in everything that I do. How can I help people in that way? But interesting, another little piece, maybe not so little, of my background is that I wasn't doing this work full time all of these decades, even though I was having the experiences for many, many decades since I was a teenager. Most of my professional life, I was a lawyer, and I was working in law firms, helping manage law firms and I was a vice president for the American Arbitration Association and so forth. I've mediated hundreds of cases myself. So I've done mediation and meditation, and the two of them get confused all the time. Like people who don't understand both of them. But yeah, so I did that most of my career, but I taught meditation full time before I went to law school, and then for about 10 years, and then went to law school later in life. Like I think I was 29 years old or something like that. So I was an older guy in law school at 29 years old, and with the 21-year-olds there. And and then taught meditation on the side somewhat. But for the last 10 years or so, I've been teaching meditation again full time. And the overcoming the fear of death work, as I said, started in my third year of law school when my mom died, and continued to present. But mostly that was free nights and weekends. I did it for free nights and weekends on the phone with people who would just find me through somebody referring somebody to somebody over the decades. And then the connecting with the other side work that started about 40 years ago in the mid 1980s. Um, I do sporadically. I've done sporadically, and then more full time in the last 10 years now. So that's kind of fills in the corporate side of my journey, if you will.
Right. Perfect. Yeah, I remember reading that too. Yeah, so you've had an extensive background also. Um, so with the meditation, I know like with my journey, like I said, after my near-death experience came in, and then that's been a big part of my awakening and awareness. I feel like that's part of the path. And so after I started meditation, it was about a year. It was like only 15 minutes, and for the longest time. And then the person who taught me, it may not be the same, meditation that you do, but it's what I had to start with, and I guess the right type for me to get on the path. And then it was probably about a year later that my 15-minute meditation moved into like a whole hour and a half. And I don't know what happened. It was really interesting, and maybe you can help clarify this.
Mm,
So it was like I would stop. I wouldn't intentionally stop after 15, 20 minutes. It would just be like, okay, I guess I just got into a pattern of the 15, 20-minute meditation, and I would just go on my way and do my other things in life. But this one time it was almost like I was feeling this energetic resistance, or this wall, right? Some people talk about the wall, like if they're running and then they hit the wall, or they're doing this, and then you push through it. So I felt like this energetic wall there, and I'm like, nope, I'm gonna push through this. It was almost like something was keeping me from going beyond there for all that time, the 15, 20 minutes. And I was like, nope, I'm gonna sit and push through this and just keep meditating. And then once I did, I don't know where I went, but when I came back in and I was still sitting there, I didn't fall down and go to sleep or anything. I was sitting up. still in that same spot when I came back into my consciousness, my awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, and I looked at my clock, it was like an hour and a half. And I'm like, I don't even know where I went, what I was doing, or anything. I just don't remember anything. But from there, it just took me on to different paths where I could start doing astral travel, looking at my life review, doing different things along that path. So I don't know. Have you ever experienced like this barrier or
So the short answer is yes and no. So here's the thing. So I've been meditating most of my life now. It's only the first, teen years that I was not meditating. Um, so have I ever experienced barriers in that long journey of meditation? That's just this lifetime. That doesn't include my Buddhist monk lifetime, several lifetimes in the past, and so forth. So just this lifetime. Yeah, I've experienced some barriers at times and so forth. But to me, the way I teach meditation is to not push, but to just allow. And then when we allow what needs to happen, that happens. That's the way I teach. Now, that's not the technique, but that's the attitude that I teach my students to have. The other thing, comment in terms of length of meditation, um, is I have my students meditating 10, 15 minutes each time, 10 to 15 minutes each time, twice a day. Some of them 5 to 6 to 7 minutes if they're very, very high anxiety. But I have them do a long rest period on the back end. Long rest period, at least 8 to 10 minutes, sometimes longer. Some of my students rest for an hour afterwards, sometimes. It just happens. Now, so there's no maximum on the rest period. Most meditation programs out there, and I've taught 5, 6, 7,000 people now to meditate, and many of them have come from other programs. They've tried other techniques and so forth, pretty much every other technique that's on the planet. Um, Most of the time, they're not taught about taking a long rest period on the back end, like I do. And what I've noticed is that the effect of taking a long rest period on the longer rest period on the back end, or a long rest period on the back end, has the effect of what you just described that you had. And it could be, again, I wasn't in your consciousness when you had the experience over, that you might have been in what I'm calling a resting period where the consciousness is just opening up and opening. It's just because that's what happens. It's a transition to come out of our meditation, is what I teach my students, and that's what I tell them, which is true. But I also tell them that their body, their consciousness does not know the difference between the technique part and the resting period. It's all one. It's, oh, Kelvin closed his eyes, Kelvin opened his eyes. As far as my body consciousness and my overall consciousness is concerned, that's all meditation. It's not just the technique is a facilitation, it's a catalyst. And after a while, I teach my students that after a while, and it depends on each person, like you said, everybody's an individual, unique. This is not, can't be predicted, but it'll happen at some point where the technique gets dropped away more and more and more and more as the mind gets more and more familiar with being outside of its conscious thinking mind of itself, what I call the 8-inch bucket part of itself. It's what a psychology professor called it. So I've been borrowing his lingo since. It's like he said, it's like this little 8-inch bucket with ping pong balls. Those are your thoughts and emotions and experiences bouncing in and out. He said, but no, the football stadiums, this huge football stadium seats 90,000 people. That's your mind too. And that's the part that most people they don't never turn the light switches on in the rest of the football stadium. They just got this little desk lamp over their 8-inch bucket part of their mind. And so I think what you described is your mind getting out of that bucket and then getting way in the nosebleed seats of the 90,000 foot stadium. And you started developing that familiarity. Yeah. And so whether it's for 15 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes, it really doesn't matter. It's the familiarity that one wants to develop and so forth and so on. But, in terms of the timing of meditation, I make it so pragmatic, so easily flexible for my students. I tell them the true story that when my kids were little and my daughter was in diapers, she's 30 now, but when she was in diapers years ago, you know, getting my son to elementary school and getting her to daycare, and my mornings were crazy. And so I would sit in my car before I went to my office, back when I had the corporate jobs, and legal jobs. I'd sit in my car outside the elementary school and I'd do a 1 minute technique and a 4 minute rest period. And the whole thing took me 5 minutes and I'd be good to go. And did I connect with my larger sense of self in that 5 minutes? Yes. Is it the same as if I did 20 minutes or a half an hour, whatever? No, it's not the same. But did I connect? And does it help develop that familiarity? Yes. And so that's what I teach my students, is to be very, very flexible with this, because the familiarity is what's important. The consistency is what's important. It's not like, because I've had students come to me and they say, well, I can only do an hour meditation, because they come from other classes, maybe they went to a monastery or whatever, and they took classes with some monks or whatever, and they were told that if they didn't meditate for an hour, it was a waste of time. And they said, well, I can only do that once a week. So they're only meditating once a week? No, I create flexibility so that there's consistency every day, every day, every day, every day, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that was part of it, because I was doing it every day for like a year before that expansion. And then after that, it was like I was doing out of body experiences, astral travel, life reviews, and you name it. I was having those experiences, and bringing back information, and I would do channel writings and, a
Mm,
lot of things like that. And then from there, at some point down the road, I'd say a couple years later, I ended up having to move. And so part of the path was moving into a Buddhist center. And there, with my daily meditation, I guess that was part of the path to help bring me more into that and to meditate more often. Um, and I guess go further with it, I guess. I don't know the whole story, but I feel like I had a past life as a Buddhist before as well. And so I was able to get to the point where I was able to be, I guess, how I describe it. I don't know if this is the right wording for it. It was like I became one with the breath. And it was like my breath slowed to the point where I wasn't breathing. And I was just existing. And I also felt like I was going into samadhi, and what they term, samadhi, the Buddhist. So, and then I heard it was like my body consciousness saying, "You're not breathing," or so I heard something say, "You're not breathing," and it took me out of it, and I gasped for air. And so that was a really interesting part of the meditation path too.
yeah, so what you're describing, yeah. So my students have had similar experiences to that at various times too. Um, the but is, I always tell my students that we're to not expect or look for anything in particular, because that closes the mind, that limits the mind. So
Mhm.
instead we go in, as I said, in this allowing mode, and with a specific technique. It's not just sitting there and allowing your mind to think whatever. There's a specific technique that you overlay on top of that, which I teach them. But um, what the experience is during meditation is so much less important than the allowing of the mind to experience itself in whatever way it's experiencing itself at that moment. That's that's what's important, because I've had all the experiences that you've described that you've had. And many years ago, when I'd only been meditating 3 years, I talked to a meditation teacher. Her name was Lillian Rosen. She'd been meditating for 14 years at the time. So back then it was like, oh my God, Lillian's been meditating for 14 years. Can you imagine what it's going to be like meditating 14? And I told her, similar to what you said, I said, Lillian, when I meditate, I close my eyes and I feel connected with everything in the universe, animate and inanimate, all beings living and all inanimate object, everything in the universe. I feel connected. I'm flooded with light inside, even if I'm in a dark room, eyes closed. I feel filled with light, and my to your point about breathing, it's like it feels like I'm not breathing. I know I must be on some level because I know I'm biologically still functioning, but it's as if I'm not breathing. And she said these 12 words to me, and I've been telling my students this ever since. The first word is not important, it's my name. The 11 words after that are the important words. She said, Kelvin, I think you may be liking that a little too much. Kelvin, I think you may be liking that a little too much. What was she saying? She was saying, don't look for that. You like it too much, you're going to start trying to make it happen. You start trying to make things happen in meditation, even experiences like that people write books about, it doesn't matter. What matters is to continue to explore another room in the 100 million rooms of the castle of our mind. That's an analogy I came up with about 5 years ago. Our mind is like a 100 million room castle. Don't get caught up in the room full of light. Don't get stuck in the room of expansion. Don't get stuck in the room, the life review room, the whatever. These are all rooms, and there's nothing wrong with them. It's beautiful. Nobody's going to get stuck in the noisy room where it's like, oh, my mind is just flying around like Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz. Nobody's going to get stuck in that room, but people will get stuck in the expansion room or in the room full of light, and they'll be missing the other 99,999,000 rooms in the castle, which is their mind. That's the analogy that I've come up with now. And I've coined a term, and I call it spiritual materialism. Most people think of materialism just as finances. Like, oh, you got this fancy car, I only have a Ford Pinto or whatever, oh, you're hot, you must be more developed than I am, or financially. Okay, maybe they are financially more developed, but that doesn't define who they are, is my point, right? Who they are as a person, what car you drive, what neighborhood you live in, where your kids go to school. That doesn't define who you are. Your consciousness is what defines who you are, right? Well, same way, we do it spiritually, and you see it all the time. People think, wow, they had this amazing experience. They must be so much more highly evolved than I am. No, you can't judge that. You can't judge yourself. Where are you in the spectrum of evolution? Never mind comparing to other people. It's a total waste of time. So to me, it's about constant growth. My logic and my 6,000 years of past life memory so far lead me to believe that we are eternal, that our soul is eternal. Not Kelvin Chin, not this body. Obviously, he's going to die eventually. Hopefully, hang around for another 20 years. But, we'll see. But soul, maybe taking on a new form and a new body, yeah, eternal, constant, continual growth is possible. Not everybody chooses to grow, however. I do, you do, maybe most of the people listening to this probably do, but not everybody does. And it's a choice. That's a choice. And it's each individual's choice. And so I don't judge people for choosing not to grow. That's their choice. They're just in a holding pattern and they want to be in a holding pattern, and that's okay. They may even want to go backwards and revisit like stuff that they did that they should have known better not to do, and they just do it again. It's like, okay, yeah, whatever, you know. But for you and me, you and I have chosen to move forward, learn from things, and so forth, right? And so
Mhm.
to me, that's a continual process. And in this 100 million room castle analogy, why not expand and go to another room and another room and another room in that eternal journey?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's like, and I loved the journey because I didn't know what I was actually doing when I was doing it. It was just happening. I was going along, I was just following the intuition and guidance on what to do. And so it just unfolded the path for me. So I love the journey. But yeah, I've come to know that also with that, we are like continuous, right? So the body, you know, of course we dump that when we're ready to transition. We go through the process, the death process, shedding that. And my spirit guides, and what I get from that is, look at it as like a cocoon, right, for your spiritual soul. And we use this time to transform during that. And then when we're done with whatever we came in to do, or our lessons, it's time to go and transition into something else. And our continuous life after life, or life between lives, I've had experiences of past lives in the womb, before death. I've had a lot of different experiences, not just about mine, but through working, because I do mediumship and things like that. So I've had a lot of different experiences that help me formulate the understanding of our continuous journey. And so it's just been an amazing, path that I've been on so far. Let's take a look at the past lives,
Right.
because I do have some questions, because I do also know you've been on, you've had a lot of different past lives that you've been through. So with that, I understand also that from my own experience that they can bleed into this present lifetime. So, for instance, there was a past lifetime where I was watching the past life from one consciousness, and I was there with some being from the other side, or whatever it was not in the body. One of my out of body experiences from a meditation. And so I was observing, and then there was a being observing, and they were showing me a past life, trying to help me to understand and grasp the continuation that we go through. And so I was watching this play out, and there was this spider and this bug caught in a web, and I was the bug, and the spider, of course, was doing its thing without really, it's just doing its thing, right? It's not like it was intentional, but there was this um, me also in the bug consciousness having the experience at the time as I was watching and observing it and being shown this, which kind of led into this lifetime where I have a fear of spiders. So things like that. And there's been many that actually bleed into this life, in which I've picked up in this life, the Buddhist, having a past life Buddhist, shaman, energy healing work, the spider, the fear of spider, a lot of different things played out in this life that maybe I didn't finish in a past life, or didn't complete, or needed those skills and abilities in this life to do something in this life with them to continue it. Have you had any of those experiences, or what is your take on them?
Sure. So first of all, my take on what you're describing is that somebody was guiding you through observing a memory that you had. So the experience is not going on at the same time as you are experiencing yourself observing that. So that's a confusion that a lot of people have, I think, when they have that experience or some variation of what you described, whether it's with the help of a being on the other side, or sometimes people just have it themselves, and they don't realize that they're experiencing a memory, and they think that there's a that they're coincidental. In other words, that they're happening at the same time, concurrently. And I think that's a mistake. We can have a very, very, very real, with all the senses and all the tactile, everything, all the senses. I've had memories like this where it's as if I am in the battle. I can feel the grit of the sand in my teeth in the desert. I'm on horseback. I can smell the sweat of the people around me and the horses and everything. And that memory is so crystal clear that I could see people then incorrectly extrapolating for that, or concluding from that, oh, my past life is happening at the same time as this lifetime. No, it's a memory that I have. And sometimes my memories are incredibly clear. Some of them are not so clear. So I have about 24 lifetimes stretching back about 6,000 years that I have memories of. And I have varying degrees of the memories, and I talk about them in this book. But the main thing, takeaway, is kind of what you're alluding to, which is the important thing, I think, is how does it serve me today? How does it help me today in 2025, 21st century Earth, Kelvin Chin, not when I was a Buddhist monk in the 14th century or the 15th century, or a crusader in the 12th century, or whatever. It all of those are interesting
Mm-hmm.
memories, and maybe they're not even accurate completely because memory is can be flawed. But again, it's not about what's accurate and inaccurate and what's absolutely right and wrong about the memory. It's what does it teach me about myself, and in your case, potential fear, and can you get rid of that? Can it help you get rid of that? And so, yeah, I've had hundreds of experiences like that over these memories that opened up so many decades ago, um, that it's helped me be a better person now. And it's always, to me, that's how I take the lessons from this, is how is it can it help me now? Like, for example, the first public one I talked about is in this is my first book. And this is my second book, is a collection of essays. And I talk about all manner of things. There's 67 essays in here. I talk about emotions, life principles, talk about past life stuff, talk about free will, selfishness. I talk about a lot of different things. And there's a chapter on meditation in this book too. But in here, this is my first book, the first public past life. And I don't make this is not a book about me. It's about overcoming the fear of death, as we discussed. And so most of the stories in here are about other people, but I do have a few stories in here about myself. And there's the first public past life memory I shared was about being a slave 2,300 years ago, a Carthaginian slave. I was Black, African, and I was enslaved by the Carthaginians to fight the Romans in one of the Punic Wars. And I had these memories of the ship and this and that, and a certain aspect of one of the ships that I figured out was a Roman ship because only the Roman ships had that for about, I think, 30 or 40 or 50 years. They had this certain thing that came down to board the Carthaginian ships, and it was a certain time period where that existed, and then it didn't exist before and after that. So I kind of triangulated and figured out who I was fighting on behalf of, and then enslaved by, etc. But the point of that memory is not any of that. That was just interesting kind of cocktail party talk, I call it. The interesting thing about that memory was I remembered willing myself to stay alive on a piece of wreckage after my ship got blown up. You know, they pour tar on it and
Mm-hmm.
throw tar in and then throw a torch in or flaming arrows and the thing would blow up. So I was, but I willed myself to stay alive. So that 2,300 years ago memory from 2,300 years ago about the strength of my mind to will my body to stay alive long enough till some fisherman found me floating in the Mediterranean somewhere on his piece of wreckage, that has served me today in the most difficult times I've had in this lifetime. For example, those corporate jobs we talked about, I've been laid off 5 times since I was 50 years old. In a short period of time, like 10, 15 years, I was laid off 5 times. Every 2, 3 years, I was getting laid off. It's like this company bought this company and this firm merged with this firm, and now I'm out on the street. I got to get a new job. That lifetime that I talk about in this book, that saved my life multiple times this lifetime from a financial standpoint about getting back in the saddle, get into a job interview and pull it to myself together, even though I didn't feel very good, you know, to strengthen myself for that job interview to get a new job, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, these kind of spillovers from lifetimes, these learnings, we'll call them, from lifetimes can be very, very useful and can be life altering like that, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I can also see how that would relate to where you said you were drowning in this lifetime too, because you almost said like you willed yourself to continue.
Yes,
You know what I mean? And so that's really interesting. And so the same water, the scenario. But yeah,
that's it.
and a lot of my past lives are playing out in this lifetime, as far as that goes. But I also think that, because a lot of times, like you said, we can get confused about it. It's not about the play, it's the lesson that we get to it and the abilities and the accomplishments that we can pull on it from there, because we always have access, I believe, to all that information at any time. We can pull from those strengths or those weaknesses and work on them in the next lifetime. And I know a lot of people talk about past lives, like there's 500 people that have Cleopatra as their past life. So how is that even possible? That's one thing that I've been trying to contemplate on over the years. It's like maybe they're just tapping into that energy and vibration, or they feel like they see themselves in that time and era. So that automatically they just think they're Cleopatra. Well, there's 500 people that are Cleopatra
I
having
think
that experience.
I think you're right. I think it could be any and all of those things. And but I think there is one Cleopatra and there's one uh Marcus and there's one Richard and there's one Frederick and there's one Buddhist monk who was living in China at that time teaching people whatever, who I don't remember my name, and so forth and so on. I just think there's one of us, but you could easily see, here's another variation. Like I agree with everything you just said in terms of the possibilities of the 500 people who think they may have been Cleopatra. And how about this? That somebody was in that lifetime with Cleopatra, and they were a handmaiden. They were, whatever they called them. I'm not sure, but one of the servants. They were somebody. Or a colleague, or
Mm-hmm.
peer, a relative peer of Cleopatra in the palace, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and knew her really, really, really well, and in that lifetime. And then let's say hypothetically, 500 years later, they are, or maybe so five, I got to do the math here. So Cleopatra's, way back. So let's say 1500 years later, they're a professor at a university or some school somewhere studying Cleopatra, and they become an expert on Cleopatra. Okay. And they don't know why. They don't know what the connection is, but they just are drawn to study everything about Cleopatra as a professor, male or female, because we can change genders too. I remember being a woman. So, and then maybe another 5 or 6, and I'm not sure if I'm doing the math here correctly, but forgive me. Another 5, 6, 7, 800 years later, they're in 2025 Earth, and they're like, oh yeah, I was Cleopatra, and they got this affinity for ancient Egypt and this and that, and the Roman Empire and that time, and like you said, they have some connection. And there may have been multiple connections, and
Mm-hmm.
they may think that they were Cleopatra. That's why I say it's not so important. Like people may read my book and they go, he says he thinks he remembers, blah, blah, blah. That's not the important thing. The important thing is the last half of this book, where I talk about what can we take away from these memories and so forth that can serve us today. That's the,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the other thing is, this is an important thing to say to people who are listening, because some people are going to be listening saying, well, I don't have any past lives. I have no memories of anything. And Laura does and Kelvin does, but I don't know. And they may have left and stopped listening. But hopefully they're still listening, because it's not about the memory of the past life. I tell my students that's not necessary for full self-development. What you can look at is your emotional patterns. And those emotional patterns that most people, that are right below the surface, that people can access in their current lifetime, that they are most likely connected to their past lives that they are not aware of. And you don't have to uncover and resurface the past life memories to do the work that may be around repairing some of the emotional patterns. or in some cases, encouraging certain emotional patterns that may not need repair, but haven't been encouraged much by us, by learning more about who we are. So I use this phrase in my teaching all the time. It's the know thyself maxim, right? So we turn within, and you know that's what I call meditation I teach, turning within, know ourselves better, and we connect with ourselves in that way, look at our emotional patterns. This is not a meditation thing. This is a look at your emotional patterns thing. And that can open up some of these awarenesses that Laura and I are talking about without having any recollection of past life memories. The other thing is, I don't encourage people to go and dig out their past life memories just willy-nilly. Now, I don't tell people not to go see a past life regressionist if they feel inclined, but they've got to feel inclined. They shouldn't feel pushed to do it. They should have an internal something that's telling them, as opposed to somebody externally saying, yeah, you need to go do this or whatever. No, you got to listen to yourself, because my experience over thousands of years and just this lifetime with my 5 or 6, 7,000 current students, clients of mine, is that we each have a self-regulating mechanism.
Mm.
And it's just inherent, it's built in. And that's kind of what Laura has referred to in herself, as she feels some guidance and so forth. And so but that's really what she's saying. She's talking about an internal voice that she uses this phrase. You're using this phrase figuratively. I'm talking to the audience now. You know this, but so that I'm translating so that they know, well, what's she talking about? Is she hearing a voice? Maybe she does hear a voice, maybe she doesn't hear a voice. It doesn't matter, but it's internal to herself. That's the issue. Okay. And to me, that self-regulates. There's something within us, call it our largest sense of self, call it our inner voice, call whatever you want to call it, that regulates what is good for us, what is needful, maybe better word is what our needs are at that time. And maybe it's not appropriate for you to uncover that past life memory where you were crucified or burned at the stake or whatever, because it's going to be too traumatic for you. And that's not a good thing. I'm not a believer in, like adding trauma to trauma. So, but you can still look at the emotional pattern that may have surrounded some pain that you may have experienced without the need to know exactly the details of how the pain was inflicted or whatever, or how is it experienced as it was experienced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And you explained it perfectly. And yeah, it was just things that come up. And same here. It's like I've learned to understand that there's a timeline per se when we are, there's things that we need to kind of look at and do the work around. And part of that can be the emotional uprising, or, this intuitive knowing, that, or I've experienced it where I'm like seeing it in the world around me. And it's like, okay, why am I experiencing this? And I always go within and I question myself and I'll let that come up so I can see it and then heal it and transform it. So, for instance, going back to the spider, I was like, there was probably last year, like all these spiders were coming into my room. I'm like, why am I having this experience with the spiders? It's time to heal it now. And I was like, okay, so how do I heal this? Because like I don't want tons of spiders, in my space. Um, so that's that timeline, and so yeah, don't go seeking it. There's a time that it'll come up and present to us, when the work needs to be done. And so I was like, okay, so how do I deal with this? And they just said, have you ever just thought about forgiving? And I was like, no, right? Because the spider is just doing its thing, right? A spider doesn't realize that it's not doing it out of harmful intention, or I'm going to kill you because I don't like you. It eats bugs. That's its life source. And so Buddhists talk about that, and so it all kind of plays out, and it's cool. I love
Yeah.
the way that you put those into words. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And the other thing is, um, if people read this book, they'll see that I have been a warrior at different times in my life. Okay, lifetimes, not this lifetime, but in other lifetimes. and that I was very effective at it, and I was very effective at leading armies of large groups of people and so forth, and that I have had we'll call it authoritarian role, you could say, in various lifetimes over the thousands of years. That does not mean that that's who Kelvin Chin is today, because I have learned over those lifetimes and many lifetimes, and starting even thousands of years ago, questioning whether authoritarian rule is a good thing or not. And I have long ago come to the conclusion that it was not. And even when I was a leader in that type of role, I questioned it, and I ruled differently. And historians have talked about how I did rule differently and so forth. And again, whether I'm right or wrong about that memory and me being that person and so forth is irrelevant. It's not so important as what am I taking away from it, from that learning, from that experience, from that personality. And that's what I talk about in my book, about the personality development over time and how personality can persist over time and can express itself in different ways in different lifetimes and can shift and can change over lifetimes. And so, where I am now today is very different from where I was 6,000 years ago, mentally, emotionally, in a lot of different ways, belief wise, and so forth as well. And yet there is some constant that seems to be there that is the me that I'm referring to from a personality standpoint, not a soul standpoint. Soul I view as more abstract than even personality. So I'm talking about something that can be talked about, the personality. There seems to be some consistency of the traits that have persisted over thousands of years, and yet I have expressed them differently, and I've changed my beliefs over those thousands of years too.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
I say that just because people need to understand that this is not just over and over and over again. You're on because sometimes people talk about this wheel of reincarnation. It's like you're on a hamster wheel. No, you're not on a hamster wheel. You are on a path, if you choose to, if you want to be on a path of growth and change and growth in a positive way, in growing more towards more contentment, more inner peace. And that's what I teach in my classes. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and meditation is a big part of that because like if we become like aware of our thoughts and our actions and like where our cycles are happening, we can choose something different. We don't have to keep on that
Absolutely.
same treadmill, and going down that same path. We can always change it.
Absolutely. Let's talk about meditation a little bit for a few minutes. So, what I teach is called turning within meditation. I call it turning within because you turn within. Um, and it's very different from most meditation techniques out there. You mentioned you've been to some Buddhist, you know, retreats or Buddhist monasteries, temples, and so forth, teachings and so forth. I actually taught Buddhist monks what I teach, and I'm always respectful of whatever, as I said earlier, of whatever somebody's beliefs are and their practices and so forth. So I never questioned what they did, but I would just say, do what I'm teaching you first, and then go back to your monastery and you do whatever, doing their Buddhist meditations and so forth. And they would all come back to me a month later, 6 months later, a year later, whenever, they'd come back and they'd say, "Oh, we get so much more out of our Buddhist meditation now after they learned what I taught them because it's so different what I teach. It's very easy. There's there's no concentration, there's no controlling of the mind, which is very different from most meditation techniques. You're not controlling your breathing. It's not about the breathing and this and that. And it's very, very easy. And because it's so easy, it very quickly turns on the opposite of the fight or flight switch, which is the medical term is the parasympathetic nervous system. And it turns on that switch very quickly. And then that's what allows the mind to get out of the 8-inch bucket part of itself, which we talked about, that thinking, conscious focusing part of itself, into that expanded football stadium part of our mind, the seats 90,000 people, this huge, vast football stadium. That can happen very quickly in the way that I teach the meditation to my students. So it's a different approach. Also, of course, there's no religious or cultural associations in the way that I teach the meditation now. So that's, I can teach Muslims and Buddhists and Christians and Jews and whoever I'm leaving out, I'm sorry, but it just doesn't matter which group around the world. I'm a humanist, as I said. So I think meditation is something that any human can practice, and doesn't matter where we are. So, I have this open door policy in that respect. I help people who want to be helped, but the
Yeah.
meditation is very, very easy. Um, and as I said earlier, few minutes twice a day, that's it. People turn things around and start experiencing the things that you and I have been talking about today, including I help a lot of parents. I don't know if there's anybody out there who's listening who's have lost loved ones, either children or spouses or friends. And the grief can be very, very, very overwhelming sometimes. So I have a lot of clients who come to me for that, and also who want to connect. They may want to connect with their loved ones on the other side. And so, as you kind of implied, it can help in that regard too, obviously.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I people talk about, doing meditation and trying to connect to the side, and then allowing, the mediumistic connection with those who are on the other side. So I think that kind of helps out, with that in helping healing. But also, I think just learning about who we truly are can help with the grieving process, or dealing with death, facing death, just learning about ourselves. And I think meditation does play a part in that, because that's been part of my journey, and a huge part. And if it wasn't for that, I'd probably be still on the same path, that I was on. But it's helped change and transform my life, going through all these different experiences, with that. So definitely. So also at that point, like, so for those who are struggling, if they're going through dark night of soul traumas, hardships, things like that, is there like pieces of wisdom, or lessons that you can share for those
So I
people?
would say, first of all, just to understand that anybody can reach out to me for free. Anybody in the world, about anything we've discussed, or even in what we have not talked about, but you think we lightly touched on. Um, so just reach out through my website and find me, either turningwithin.org. You can see that on my um, on here right now, and send me an email and set up a time to talk to me for free. Initial free 1 hour consultation with me. But the advice I would say to people is it is possible to experience contentment and inner peace throughout one's life. I started out in this lifetime on my journey on a pretty rocky road, feeling very, very anxious, and I was desperate when I was a teenager. And the meditation turned my life around, which is why I learned how to teach meditation in this very, very easy way. And I've been teaching it all these years, even when I had my legal and corporate jobs. I continued teaching meditation on the side, and now I'm teaching it full time. And my daughter, who's now 30 years old, or 31 years old now, she just turned 31, she's also teaching through our nonprofit as well. So I would say that would be the best path for people to, if they're in some dark place. I just got a long email this morning, right before we went on, Laura, from a woman in Hong Kong who had moved there who earlier this year, evidently, with her 9-year-old daughter to be closer to the daughter's father, whom the woman had divorced. And it's very difficult for her. She's having a lot of stress about this. She has fears about death and dying. And so she found me somehow. People find me on the internet, or they get referred to me from therapists or psychiatrists or whatever, and I help them get out of that place. But meditation is the key, uh, in my opinion, because by turning within, we can turn around the chemical imbalances in our brain chemistry that can cause us these fears and anxieties and these feelings of darkness and so forth. And it's partially a biochemical thing, a very biological thing, and it's partially a consciousness thing, like Laura's been alluding to, in terms of our perspective and knowing ourselves and looking at clarifying who we are and all of that. But they're both. I call that a two-prong approach. We need to experientially experience the reduction of the stress by changing our biochemistry, and also increasing our understanding is how I would paraphrase what Laura was talking about. That's the understanding approach, and they go hand in hand with each other. I was a test subject when I was a teenager, in the first medical studies ever done in the United States on any form of meditation. And they took blood samples, and they could see that the cortisol levels reduced and the biochemistry balanced and so forth. And so I would say that would be my piece of advice to folks. Reach out and have a conversation with me, and we can take it from there and see how it can help.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I think that like if we have an understanding of who we truly are, it can help shift, our way of looking at things. If we know that this is not an end,
Right.
and we are continuous, and then that we do have other lives, past lives or future lives or multiple dimensional lives, whatever the case may be, I think it kind of help with grief and, going into that space of transition. Also, and then with legacy imprints and the afterlife, I wanted to kind of touch on that because everything that we do now in the present moment affects all of that, and what was before affects now,
Before we
from
go
my
there,
understanding.
let me just make one comment. The issue of the meditation is so important because if we only focus on trying to change our thoughts, we're using the same limited consciousness to try to change those thoughts with limited effect.
Mm.
Whereas if we meditate and expand our conscious capacity along with what you're saying, then what you're saying will be much more effective because the mind is less limited. It feels a sense of freedom. It has a more expansion to it. A quick analogy. I came up with this deck analogy. So you got this ocean going ship with a huge deck, and it has 100 to 200 deck chairs on it. And most people's approach is to move around the deck chairs. Those are our thoughts, emotions, and experiences, our beliefs, and so forth, and how we think and our emotional patterns and all that. And it's important. It's important to work with those. It's not nothing. That's important. In fact, getting rid of the broken deck chairs, the patterns and the thinking that don't serve us anymore, that's important. That's valuable. But wouldn't it even be more effective if we can expand the size of the deck? And so what I do in my meditation classes is I teach people how to expand the deck. And that's why therapists, spiritual counselors, psychiatrists refer their clients to me, because then when they work with the clients on the deck chairs, it's much more effective. But my approach is, let's expand the deck. And I do some work with the deck chairs separately, like if I'm working with people in some of my essay on some of the topics in here. But the meditation is the crucial missing link, typically, in that ocean liner deck and deck chair analogy. So go ahead with your legacy. Yeah.
So just to kind of follow up with that, that kind of made sense when you were talking about that, because and I do counseling for people with addictions, for 2 years. And so I can see that how it plays out, because it's like little changes, the deck chairs versus like expanding your awareness and doing it. It could be a bigger change and transformation, because like it was like, okay, let's focus on replacing this is just an example, this behavior with something that's healthier, right? And so that's like a little change. It's mindset, right? It's like, okay, when I have this desire to drink, what else can we do? How can we replace it with that? But it's not really healing, it's just moving the deck chairs around. And that's kind of what I was thinking of when you were talking about that.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so a good example. But yeah, I was saying about the legacy imprint and afterlife. Everything we do now does affect from understanding everything, and before affects now, and what we do now affects later. Um, so how do you see a legacy for you and everything that you're doing? Like even after you pass and you transition,
yeah.
how do you see that unfolding? What is your hope in cultivating around life, death, and what comes next?
Well, that's a beautiful question. So, and I've thought about this, and really, I have a long view on what I do. I have a long view on a lot of things. And because my memories go back 6,000 years, and I don't know how long I've been around as if I've been around, if a soul is eternal, there's no beginning, there's no end. But I don't know how long I've been around as a human, but longer than 6,000 years probably. But I have memories that go back 6,000. And if I think about that and all my memories, and I think about and I project, as you say, going forward, I take a long view on how the effects of what I'm doing and teaching will change large groups of people, on planet Earth. We'll just talk about planet Earth. I talk about having another lifetime on another planet. That's why I hesitated there. So this is to focus on planet Earth, humanity. Um, so I'm planting seeds. I see myself as a seed planter, to answer your question. I'm planting seeds for the next million years. I take a 500 to 1,000 to a million year view of what I'm doing. So I don't know, you know, um, will my books become bestsellers in another 100 years from now, or 200 years from now, 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now? I don't know. We'll see, you know.
Mm.
This book, Marcus Aurelius Updated, is so titled because Marcus Aurelius, those of you people know who Marcus Aurelius was, he's second century Roman emperor, but he's known as a philosopher. He's known as a Stoic philosopher because he didn't want to be emperor. He wanted to be a philosopher, and he was a philosopher, but he also happened to take on role as leader of almost 20% of the world's population at the time. But um, my point is that um, he wrote what's known today as Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It was not a book that he wrote. People collected his self uh, reflections that he wrote almost every day for about 10, 12 years or something like that. Um, they were about himself. They were very personal. So they were genuine, candid comments about himself and about how he viewed the world. They were contemplative, what we could call contemplative meditations, not meditations in the way that you and I've discussed, but
Mm.
contemplative meditations, self-reflections. And then somebody found them in around 800 AD, and somebody printed them when the Gutenberg printing press came around, whenever that was, in 1500, whatever it was. And then in the 1700s, somebody named it and called it Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. So look at how many years it took for those self-reflections to become, an international bestseller that was never even intentioned to be a book.
Right.
2,000 years. So I take a long view, is my point, on what I do, and I'm planting seeds, and I hope they germinate. And my goal is to help reduce suffering in the world. That's what I do. And I do it through teaching meditation, and I do it through teaching my ideas and concepts and sharing those with people. And I do spiritual coaching sessions with people on any number of topics that they want to bring up. And that's what I'm doing. But,
Yeah.
500, 5,000, 500,000. years. That's my long view.
Beautiful vision. Thank you. Yeah, and hopefully the same here. I don't really have a timeline. But I did want to touch on too, also, like you talked about the biological death. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. What do you want to talk about?
Just explain what you mean by that term, the biological death. So I don't know that a lot of
Oh, when I
people
use
may
the
be
term
aware of that.
biological death, you mean? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started using the term biological death in my afterlife classes because I used to just say when we die. And the reality is, excuse me, we never die. Our soul never dies, our consciousness never dies. So that's why I started saying biological death, when my body ceases to function. That's what I
Mhm.
by biological death. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'm trying to change my verbiage around that too, being a deaf doula and helping people with that because we don't, there's no end to us. Like we've been saying, it's continuation. So I'm trying to find the verbiage, and I loved that term that you use. The biological death. For as part of the body.
Yeah, I'll
Um,
tell you something else, Laura. There was actually, when you were talking, I just remembered there was an interim stage where I used to say physical death. So first I
mhm,
used to say death or dying or whatever. Then in the interim stage, I said physical death. But then I realized that, wait a minute, if we're talking to a physicist, then, and we're talking about light bodies, because like you, I have had experiences on the other side many times, and I can see light bodies, and I've had visitations on this side from beings who are
mhm,
biologically dead, and yet I see their light body. Yes, a physicist, that's a physical body. The light is, to them, light is physics. It is physical
mhm,
because it can be measured and so forth, and it exists in the continuum of change. Okay, then it's physical. Okay, it's not biological though. The light body I'm talking about. So that's why
right.
I changed from saying physical body, just to help you. Maybe you can give you clarity there so you won't go that route. But that's why I say biological body, because it's biological. It's
Mhm.
functioning in a biological way.
Yeah,
And
yeah. And I
then it's
term it as like an intelligent system because it kind of just does its own thing. We really don't have to do anything with the breath. We don't have to tell ourselves to breathe. It's biologically an intelligence and it just does its thing. So
yeah,
that's
the parasympathetic is what's controlling the breathing and so forth. The
mm,
autonomic nervous system is controlling the breathing. It's just automatic. It's
yeah.
amazing how this machine that we're talking about works,
Mhm.
because most people have no idea how complex it is. It is so complex, you know.
Yeah. And with the identity attachment, that's who I am is the body.
Right,
But
right.
it's not, and a lot of people just see it as who they are, because of that
Yeah,
attachment to the body.
exactly.
So yeah, and I think finding the right verbiage helps to demystify uh, the the reality of it,
Well,
and helps them connect more to the truth.
I totally agree with you, and I'll further underscore what you just said. I'm not a word Nazi, jokingly, I say that sometimes. I'm not a word Nazi on everything, but there are certain things that I am very careful about my word choice. Because why? Because words have meaning,
Mm,
and meaning leaves an impression in our consciousness, and it can help then create our belief system that may be accurate or false. So we want a more accurate belief system, because the belief system, we could say our desires and our beliefs and so forth, are really our knee jerk, the emotions and so forth. That's our knee jerk, that's our default, that's subconscious. Well, we want to develop a subconscious that's consistent, and therefore, to me, one way of starting that positive snowballing effect is what you just said, is to be conscious of our word choice.
mhm, yeah. And with that, how can we demystify, shifting death as a negative thing to a positive thing?
Yeah. And demystify, I use that word on one of my websites. My kelvinchin.org website is my more spiritual website. And I talk about how that you want to sum up what I do is to demystify the mystical. That's everything that I do. It's about demystifying the mystical, because everything that this people consider paranormal or mystical, to me, it's normal. And to you, it's normal. To most people, it's not normal. And I understand why. And I don't make a judgment about it. And I'm not saying that you or I are better than anybody else. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that we need to change our languaging towards it so that we don't continue to keep it mystical. So
Mm-hmm.
we can talk about it in more normal language.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's the start, to answer your question, is just to demystify it by using more normal language about all of this, when we talk about this. Does that answer your question? Did you have anything more specific?
Yeah, yeah, it did. Yeah, because I think with doing that and using the right terms around death, we can help overcome, like the fears and the doubts and the worries and things like that about our transition, and ease suffering and ease, grief, with the right verbiage, the understanding of who we are and the whole concepts of it.
And also it's being sensitive to the person we're talking to. So
Mm-hmm.
let's make believe that we're not talking to a class, but you're doing your death doula work with an individual, with one person. And I tell a story in here about Jimmy, who happened to be, I don't say this in the book, but I'll tell you, it was my now ex-girlfriend's father, who I was helping transition and so forth, and his cancer had flared up again and so forth. The point is, I asked him, just like I ask everybody, what's your belief system, Jimmy, about what's going to happen after you die? Everybody knew he was going to die. It was just a matter of, was it weeks? Was it months? It was not going to be years. We knew it was going to be months. Turned out to be 2 months after I asked him this question, I think. So, but I said, Jimmy, what do you think? And he said, well, I think that's it. I think that's it. Vietnam War vet, Cobra attack helicopter pilot, you know, uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's it. I'm dying. I'm dead. I'm gone. Da, da, da. And I said, okay, yeah, that was like my father's belief system. But then Jimmy said, but I'm not sure. And I didn't want to lead him on by assuming what he meant, but I knew what he meant pretty much. I said, well, what do you mean by that? So I always ask people, so what do you mean by that? And he said, oh, well, I'm not sure what happens. What if something, I'm still there? He used some phrase like that. What if I'm still there? And I said, oh, yeah, okay. And then I held his hand. He was lying. At that point, he was just bedridden. He was a
Mm-hmm.
big guy, 275 pounds, 6'5". And so I was kneeling next to his bed at the time, talking to him, and I held his hand. Actually, I just taught him to meditate. I taught him to meditate, just lying in bed there. So I was holding his hand, and so I had physical contact with him. Is my point of saying that. I was holding his hand, and I said, Jimmy, so that's interesting. You're not sure. A lot of people aren't sure. Let me tell you a story. So I told him this story, and I have this story. The longer version of this story is in this book, about my friend Henry, college friend of mine, who had his tonsils out. So I describe Henry's near-death experience when he had his
Mm-hmm.
tonsils out, right? That's the point. So I tell him this story about my friend Henry at 8 years old. When he's 20, he's telling me this story. When he was 8 years old, he almost died and got hemorrhaged, when his mom gave him a chocolate chip cookie that was overcooked, overbaked, and it cut out his sutures that he had just gotten that morning,
No, no.
and so he's hemorrhaging, and the doctor and he remembered everything, and he was on the roof of he's on the ceiling. His mind, his consciousness, is on the ceiling of the living room, looking at his little 8-year-old body, wondering why his mom was freaking out, because he said, I felt so peaceful. And he's in the car with the doctor came, and he didn't wait for the ambulance. The mom called their family doctor. He came right over and can't wait for the ambulance. He's hemorrhaging, he lost too much blood. So he put him in his own car and drove Henry and his mom to the hospital. But he remembered everything. He remembered what the doctors were wearing, what they said, what color the necktie was of the doctor, everything. And he came back and told his mom all this. I told Jimmy this story, and just like 10 years ago or whatever, when Jimmy died, right before he died, and I was holding his hand, and when I told him this story, his hand relaxed. So I
Well,
knew that something had clicked in Jimmy's consciousness. Something allowed him to feel less stressed about whatever is going to be happening. Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you were teaching meditation right before the passing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I
Because
think that's helpful.
I tell my students, I don't tell them all this, but the ones who are really afraid of death, sometimes I'll tell them, look, what I'm teaching you, you will remember. Especially, I've taught people who are terminally ill and died like 6 months or a year, or like 3 months or whatever, and
Mhm.
they know. And so I'm teaching them right before, and so then all of them, I tell them this. Sometimes I tell some of my other students this, but the terminally ill ones, I always tell them this. Look, what I'm teaching you, at some point, you might not, and you know this, Laura, as a death doula, you might not be able to speak anymore at some point, you know.
Mhm.
But you can still think. You'd be lying there in a hospital bed or at home or whatever. You can think very clearly, but you cannot speak and communicate. Maybe you can't even write anymore to anybody, but you will be able to meditate. You will never, ever feel disconnected from yourself. You will always be able to connect with that larger sense of self that I'm teaching you to connect with. This is something you will never, ever forget. You'll be able to meditate when you're on the other side. You'll be able to meditate through your whole transition experience if you choose to. It's available to you because it's in your consciousness. Once I've taught you, you will never forget this.
Mhm.
And that alone sometimes allows people to just
Yeah, beautiful.
relax
Mhm.
more. Right? Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any other topics that you wanted to bring up before we bring this to a close?
No, I think we've covered a lot. Yeah. But just that this book of essays covers a lot of different topics. So I mean, just to give you a sense, there's 67, they're short essays. They're like, I have essays on, I'll just talk about a few titles here. Winning in Happiness, Suffering in Happiness, Unconditional Love, Crying is Not Weakness, Relationships Over Time, The Nuances of Forgiveness, Ego, Balance, um, Cruelty, Getting Beyond Bullying, very appropriate in today's
Mm,
world, right? Giving and taking, self-interest versus self-centered. They're not the same thing. Selfishness, um, spiritual materialism. We talked about that a little bit today. The meaning of life, free will. Uh, what about the term it was meant to be? Um, Destiny and losing a child. Was it your destiny to lose the child? Short answer, no. But I have a lot of parents who I help who've lost children. They've died at all different ages. And some people tell them that their child was supposed to die. I think it's a horrible thing to say.
mm,
But there was a meaning behind it. No, 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 no. Some things happen. Some things happen in life that are unforeseen. A child can be born with, I call it a mistake, in their DNA, where they may be born with cancer and die when they're 2 years old. That's possible. Or they're born with the brain outside of the physical skull, or they're born with their intestines outside of their body. That's not meant to be. That is a mistake in the biological structure that can happen.
mhm,
So, everything is not explainable in you know, um, some sort of destiny kind of way. No, that the child was destined to be born with a brain outside his. There was a lesson for the parents to learn how to deal with that. No, it's a horrible thing, and it needs to be accepted as what it is. Love and self-interest. angels. I have one called Online Dating with Angels, Karma Unbundled, Ego and God, Experiencing Eternity. So those are just a few of the 67 essays, and they're just to give people a sense of the breadth of the topics that I talk about there.
Yeah, wonderful, beautiful topics. Definitely a lot more to talk about, and maybe we can do another one at some point.
Sure,
But I want to, like I said, be respectful for your time. And so with this closing, so if you would give one word to life, when I say life, what is the one word that comes up to you?
Oh, I would say discernment.
And one word for death?
One word for life or for death?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, acceptance.
And one word for beyond?
For the beyond?
Yep.
Vacation.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kelvin, for being on today,
Great.
and hopefully have another opportunity at some point.
Sounds good, Laura. Great to be here with you.
Thank you.